My name is Faith Tatum, and I was 33 the night my own father smiled at me across his father's birthday table and told me I didn't deserve our name. My brother clapped, both hands out loud like I'd just lost a game show in front of everyone he wanted to impress. The whole room went still and waited for me to fall apart. I didn't. 3 days before that dinner, I'd found a cream-colored folder on a desk inside our family's workshop, and I walked into that house knowing one thing none of them knew. So when my grandfather set down his fork and pushed back his chair, my father's smirk was about to cost him everything he thought he already owned. Stay with me. The dinner is only where this starts. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary families hit the exact moment everything they believed about loyalty gets tested out loud. If you're the quiet one who notices things, who fixes things, who never gets thanked for it, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe. I should tell you what I do, because it matters later. I'm a municipal engineer for the town of Ashford. I measure bridges, I sign off on load limits, I write the boring reports that keep a culvert from collapsing under a school bus. It is not glamorous work. Nobody posts a photo of a properly graded drainage ditch, but I like that a thing I checked will still be standing in 40 years, long after anybody remembers my name was on the form. The invite came through the family group chat at 6:14 on a Tuesday. My mother sent it. "Grandpa's 81st, Saturday, 6 o'clock," she wrote, "and please, if you bring something that photographs nice." I read that twice. I live alone in a townhouse on Larkin Street, 15 minutes from my parents' place, close enough to show up and far enough to leave. That weekend, I had already promised Grandpa I'd fix the sticking back door on the workshop office, the one that had swelled every August for a decade. So I packed a chisel and a block plane next to the wrapped gift. That's the part of me my family never learned to see. I don't fix things to be thanked. I fix them because somebody has to. And for 33 years that somebody had quietly been me. My brother Bryce would have called a contractor and billed it to the shop. I just brought a chisel. I told myself this birthday would be like all the others. A little cold, a little performative. Over by 9. I had no idea I'd packed the wrong tools for what that house was about to do to me. My parents' house always smells like furniture polish and performance. I drove the 15 minutes from Larkin Street and let myself in the side door. Inside, the whole family was crowded around my mother's phone, scrolling photos of Bryce's new house, the 4-car garage, the kitchen island the size of a rowboat. "Look at that backsplash," my mother kept saying. Her name is Lorraine, and she runs our family the way a casting director runs auditions. Everyone has a role, and mine was understudy. She glanced up when I came in. "Faith, you made it." Like it was a surprise I could find the place. My father, Damon, was holding court by the counter. He looked me up and down. Work boots, no makeup. And gave the little laugh he saves for me. "Still out there measuring other people's work, sweetheart?" My mother smiled into her wine. "She just measures other people's work," she repeated, to nobody and everybody, and a few cousins chuckled because that's what you do at that table. I set the gift down and said nothing. You learn the math early in a family like mine. The cost of correcting them is always higher than the cost of being underestimated. Through the window, I could see Bryce out on the back patio, phone pressed to his ear, shoulders hunched in a way that didn't match a man bragging about his backsplash. He dropped his voice when my mother slid the door open. I caught 3 words before the glass cut him off. "The South Parcel." Then he laughed. Too loud, the way he laughs when he's lying. I didn't know yet what the South Parcel was, but my whole body went quiet, the way it does on a job site right before something I've measured turns out wrong. To understand why that phrase chilled me, you have to know about Tatum Trade Works. 50 years ago, my grandfather Walt built a workshop on 6 acres at the south edge of Ashford and started teaching kids who'd been written off, kids one bad week from dropping out, how to weld, how to frame a wall, how to make a clean joint that would hold weight. I half grew up there. The whole place ran on routine, and the routine started with a sound. Bolted by the door was a brass bell on a worn leather strap, and at 8 a.m. sharp Grandpa would ring it twice. And 40 teenagers who claimed they didn't care would file in and care anyway. I can still hear it. The other thing I remember is the folding ruler he kept in his shirt pocket. Boxwood, brass-jointed, soft at the hinges from 60 years of thumbs. He'd snap it open to make a point and snap it shut to end an argument. "Measure twice," he'd say, "because the wood doesn't forgive, and neither does a man who skips a step." That shop wasn't a business to me. It was the one place in my family where what you could do mattered more than how it looked. Earl, the head instructor, had been there 26 years. Marg ran the apprenticeship rolls and knew every kid's home situation by heart. Last year, 41 young people walked out of that shop with a trade certificate and a paycheck waiting. None of that photograph's nice. None of it ends up in the family group chat. But when Bryce said the South Parcel on a phone he didn't want my mother to hear, the South Parcel was the ground that workshop sat on. And a name's just a word, my grandfather always said, until somebody does something with it. Dinner was still an hour off, so the men did what they always do. They talked about the shop's future as if I weren't standing 4 feet away. Damon had a glass of bourbon and a theory. "Place is a money pit," he said. "Walt's too sentimental to see it." Bryce nodded along. Easy. The favorite son agreeing with the favorite parent. 6 acres on the south side, Bryce said. Just sitting there. "You know what that's worth now?" I asked, lightly, what they meant by worth. Bryce gave me the smile he gives the cousins. "Grown-up stuff, Faith. Don't strain yourself." My father laughed. They moved on. I went to hang my jacket and Bryce's was already on the hook, and when I lifted mine, a business card slipped from his breast pocket and tipped onto the floor. I picked it up to put it back. Heavy stock, navy print, Halverson Group, land and commercial development, and under it a name, Greg Saylor, with a cell number written by hand on the back. I stood there in the hallway holding it longer than I should have. You don't hire a land developer to refinance a workshop. You hire a land developer to make a workshop disappear. I slid the card back into Bryce's jacket exactly as I'd found it, smoothed the fabric, and stepped away before anyone saw. My hands were steady. My head was already running numbers. 6 acres, south side, a developer with a handwritten cell number. That's not a man modernizing his grandfather's legacy. That's a man pricing it for demolition. I went back to the kitchen and smiled at my mother's backsplash and said it was beautiful. But somewhere under the floor of that pretty house, something had started moving, and I was the only one in the room who'd felt it shift. Here's the thing I'm not proud of, and I'll say it plain, because you've probably done a version of it too. For years, I'd been quietly holding pieces of this family together with both hands and never sending a bill. When the shop's liability insurance lapsed in 2019 because Damon forgot, I paid the reinstatement out of my own checking account and never said a word. When Marg needed someone to write the county workforce grant and nobody in the family could spell appropriation, I wrote it on 3 Sundays in a row. When my mother's car needed a transmission the same month as Bryce's wedding, guess who covered it and guess who got the toast? I used to think this was love. I've since learned it was a habit, and a dangerous one. Being the useful one feels like being valued, right up until you notice that useful and invisible are the same address. My father once introduced me to a business contact as our other one. She does something with roads. That's not cruelty exactly. It's worse. It's not even thinking about you long enough to be cruel, so I'd stopped explaining myself. Stopped showing up with receipts. I did the work. I kept the proof in a drawer in my head, and I let them believe I was the daughter who measured other people's lives because she had none of her own. The trouble with making yourself small enough to disappear is that one day, the people you did it for start making plans that only work if you stay gone. I'd spent 33 years training my family to overlook me. Standing in that kitchen with a developer's card warm in my memory, I finally understood I'd trained them a little too well. We sat down to eat at 6:40. My mother had done place cards, actual place cards, and mine put me at the corner, between a cousin's toddler and the wall. Grandpa was at the head, smaller than last year, his hands trembling a little around his water glass. He caught my eye and winked, and I felt the old steadiness of him even from the cheap seats. Earl and Marg were there too, and 2 members of the workshop's nonprofit board, Dawn and a woman named Pat. Invited, I assumed, to make the night feel official. The food came out. Damon stood with his bourbon before anyone had a fork in their hand. "I want to say something," he announced, while we're all together. He looked at Grandpa, then swept the table. 50 years my father built something with this name, and I think we all know who's ready to carry it forward. He raised his glass toward Bryce. "To the future of Tatum Trade Works." Bryce ducked his head, modest, like a man accepting an award he'd written himself. The board members clinked politely. My mother beamed. I lifted my water an inch and set it back down. Across the table, Grandpa didn't drink either. He just watched his son the way he used to watch an apprentice cut a board too fast, quiet, patient, already knowing where the saw was going to slip. I thought the toast was the worst it would get. A little theater, a little favoritism, dessert, and out by 9. I was wrong about that the way I'm rarely wrong about a load calculation. The hard part of the night hadn't started. It was 4 sentences away, and my father was the one about to say it. It was Pat, the board member, who set it off without meaning to. She turned to me, kind, and asked what I thought about the shop's future, since I knew construction. The table's attention swung my way, and my father didn't like it there. Before I could answer, he set his glass down hard. "Faith doesn't get a vote on the future of this family," he said. The room cooled. Pat blinked. I kept my voice even and said the workshop wasn't only family, it was 41 kids a year. That was the wrong thing to be right about. Damon's face did the thing it does, the smile that isn't one. "You want to lecture me about this name?" He leaned across the table toward me, and the whole room leaned with him. "You've never built anything. You measure what other people build and you send them a bill. You're a clipboard, Faith. You don't deserve to carry our name." And then, into the silence, my brother clapped. 3 slow times. He actually laughed while he did it, and a cousin laughed too because they were waiting to see what was safe to do. My mother looked at her plate and let it happen, which is its own kind of clapping. 11 people watched to see if I'd cry. I felt it land. I won't pretend it didn't. But I'd spent 15 years learning that the worst thing you can give a person like my father is the reaction he's performing for. So I picked up my napkin, folded it once, and laid it beside my plate. My hands didn't shake, and in the quiet where my breakdown was supposed to go, I thought about a cream-colored folder, 3 days old, sitting in a drawer in my mind. I had not packed a chisel for this, but I had brought something else. There's a particular silence that follows public cruelty, and everyone at that table was now sitting in it. The toddler beside me banged a spoon, oblivious, the only honest sound in the room. Earl had gone very still, the stillness of a man biting down on something. Marg's jaw was tight. Pat looked like she wished she'd never asked her question. My father, having dropped his bomb, sat back satisfied, already reaching for the bourbon, certain the show was over and he had won it. He expected the next move to be mine. A sob, a stormed exit, the slammed door that would let everyone agree I was too emotional to matter. I gave him none of it. I took a sip of water. I said, "Pass the rolls, please," to my cousin, and she passed them, hands shaking slightly, and I buttered one. You could feel the table not understand. Calm is the one response a man like that has no script for. He can drown out shouting. He can dismiss tears. But a woman who butters a roll while you're trying to destroy her in front of the people you most want to impress, that he doesn't know what to do with. I learned a long time ago to stop explaining myself to people who'd already decided who I was. Explaining is begging with better grammar. So I didn't beg. I ate. And under the table, my phone sat dark in my lap, and on it, 3 days old, was a photograph I'd taken in the workshop office at 7:40 on a Wednesday morning. Nobody at that table knew it existed. My grandfather's water glass was steady now. He was looking at me, and the smallest thing moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. A decision. Let me back up to a Sunday when I was 12, because you can't understand that steady look from my grandfather without it. My parents had a screaming match that summer that I won't get into, and I did what I always did. I rode my bike the 4 miles to the shop to get away from the noise. Grandpa was there alone, sanding a window sash. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just handed me a scrap of oak and the folding ruler from his shirt pocket and said, "Show me a 4-inch line." I measured it crooked. He didn't laugh. He turned the ruler in my hand, lined up the brass tip, and said, "Measure twice. The wood doesn't forgive, and neither does a careless man." We spent 3 hours that afternoon, and I cut one clean tin on. And when I left, he pressed the ruler back into my hand and said, "Keep it for next week." The next week he showed me a name carved tiny into the boxwood near the hinge, F. Tatum, done with a marking knife in his shaky old hand. "So you remember it's yours to use," he said. Bryce never came on those Sundays. He was 14 by then, and the shop bored him. He wanted whatever was easy and loud. While I was learning that a joint either holds or it doesn't, my brother was learning that being the son was a full-time job that paid in advance. The shop taught me to measure before I cut. Wood, and later decisions, and later still, people. My family thought that made me small. They thought a woman who measures is a woman who can't build. They never once considered the other thing about a person who measures everything. She always knows, before anyone else does, exactly what doesn't fit. The dinner is where this story lands, but the wire that pulled it tight got strung 2 weeks earlier, at my actual job. A rezoning application crossed the planning desk for the south side of town, filed by an LLC I'd never heard of. Cooper Ridge Holdings. The parcel number caught my eye because I'd surveyed near it for a stormwater study. It was the workshop's 6 acres. I pulled the county deed that afternoon, the way I'd pull any record, no permission needed because it's public. The land sat inside a trust, and the trustee of record was Walter J. Tatum, my grandfather. Not Bryce, not Damon. So whoever filed that rezoning would eventually need an owner's signature to close anything, and the only owner was an 81-year-old man. Then I found the field notes attached to the file. A licensed surveyor had walked the lot the week before, staking corners for a commercial site plan, the kind you draw when you're planning to scrape a property flat. I drove out to the shop that evening. Casual, told Earl I was checking the gutters. 2 orange survey stakes sat in the gravel by the lumber shed, fresh, ribbon still bright. Somebody was measuring my grandfather's land to take it apart, and they hadn't told my grandfather. I want to be clear about what I did and didn't do, because I've replayed it 100 times. I didn't have proof of who. I didn't have the authority to stop a private deal, because I wasn't the owner. Only Walt was. What I had was a public record, a survey stake, and a brother who'd said 3 words on a patio. So I did the only thing the situation actually let me do. I started quietly to find out exactly whose signature they were planning to use. I want to stop here for 1 second because this next part is where I almost talked myself out of looking closer. If you've ever spotted something wrong in your own family and told yourself you were probably overreacting, stay with me. I nearly did that. I'm glad I didn't. If you're the kind of person who notices things, hit subscribe and stick with me, because it matters how this ends. 3 days before the birthday, I went to see Bryce at the shop. Alone. On purpose. I found him in the office going through a filing cabinet that wasn't his to go through. I kept it light. "Bryce," I said, "what's going on with the south parcel?" He didn't even flinch, and that told me more than a flinch would have. He smiled and shut the drawer with his hip. "Just looking at refinancing options," he said. "Grandpa's behind on the building loan. I'm trying to get him better terms before the place bleeds out." It was a good lie. It had a number in it. A sympathetic motive. A villain that wasn't him. If I hadn't already seen the deed and the survey stakes, I might have believed it. Instead, I just nodded and said that sounded smart, and watched relief flicker across his face, the relief of a man who thinks his little sister bought it. "Don't mention it to the old man," he added casual. "He worries." That was the line that settled it for me. You don't hide good news. You hide good news from a man only when the news is bad for him and good for you. I told Bryce I wouldn't say anything. That part was even true. I just didn't tell him why, because I'd already decided that the next time the South parcel came up, it wasn't going to be me who brought it. So I tried gently to warn my grandfather. I drove out to the shop 2 days before the party with coffee, the way I had 100 times. He was in the office chair, reading glasses down his nose, and he looked older than I'd let myself notice. Hands trembling around the mug, a beat slow to follow what I said. I didn't want to scare him. The man has a heart that's been through 2 stents, and dropping, "Your grandson is selling your life's work" on him felt like a thing that could stop it. So I went sideways. I asked how the building loan was doing. He waved a hand. "Damon handles the money side now," he said. "Bryce too. Let the boys carry it." I asked carefully if anybody had talked to him about the land. He looked at me a long moment, and then something in his face just closed. "It's all in good hands, sweetheart," he said, and patted my arm and changed the subject to whether I was eating enough. I left frustrated, certain I'd hit a wall of an old man's pride. Out in the shop, the bell hung by the door, and on my way past I noticed something I hadn't put together before. The class on the floor was thin. Maybe a dozen kids where there used to be 30-odd. I asked Marg about it on my way out. She frowned. "Enrollment paperwork's been getting lost," she said. "New apprentices keep not getting processed. Bryce said he'd handle intake." Somebody was letting the shop go quiet on purpose, thinning it out so it would look like a failing program nobody would miss. I drove home, rattled. I'd misread my grandfather completely. I just didn't know it yet. The morning before the birthday, I went back to fix that swollen office door I'd promised Grandpa, the chisel and block plane in my bag. The office was empty. While the glue on the rehung hinge set, I went looking for the insurance binder so I could check the policy I'd quietly kept current for 6 years. It wasn't in the cabinet. It was on Bryce's borrowed desk, under a cream-colored folder I didn't recognize. I'm an engineer. I read what's in front of me. It's a reflex I can't switch off. The folder wasn't sealed, so I opened it, and the floor of my stomach dropped 4 feet. Inside was a letter of intent. Buyer, Halverson Group. Contact, Greg Saylor. Subject property, the 6 acres of Tatum Trade Works. Purchase price with a comma in it that I won't say out loud, an estimated closing 60 days out, and 1 line of terms that I read 3 times to be sure. Property to be delivered vacant. Existing training operations to cease prior to closing. Cease. Not relocate. Not modernize. Cease. And at the bottom, on the signature line under seller's representative, was my brother's name in his own looping hand, Bryce W. Tatum, already signed. Clipped to the inside cover was a sticky note in his handwriting. "Dad on board. Need W before the party." I stood in that quiet office with the smell of fresh wood glue and understood the whole machine at once. They weren't refinancing anything. They were going to dissolve the program, push out the kids, hand Bryce a payday, and they needed 1 signature to do it. An 81-year-old man's, gotten before the party, while everyone was warm and distracted and grateful. I took out my phone. I photographed every page. Then I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it. I sat in my truck in the gravel lot for 10 minutes and just breathed. The bell hung by the shop door in the side mirror, and I kept looking at it. 2 rings a morning for 50 years, 41 kids last year with a trade and a way out, and 1 line on a sticky note, "Need W before the party." That phrase reorganized everything I thought I'd seen for a month. The thin classes weren't neglect. They were staging, making the place look dead so nobody would mourn it. The refinancing lie wasn't about the building loan. It was cover, so I wouldn't look too hard before the ink dried. And the birthday dinner wasn't a celebration. It was the closing table. They'd get my grandfather soft and surrounded by family, slide some paper under his hand between the cake and the coffee. A resolution naming the boys co-trustees so they could move the land without him, I'd guess, and call it taking the burden off him. I thought about charging back into that office and confronting Bryce right then. "I want you to know I considered it. but I made myself do the thing the shop taught me: measure first. If I accused him with nothing but a photo of a document he could say was just exploring options, he'd deny it. My parents would close ranks, and they'd simply do the signing somewhere I couldn't see. Worse, a screaming fight 2 days before the party might be exactly the stress that put my grandfather in an ambulance, which, I realized coldly, would suit Bryce's timeline fine. So I didn't confront. I drove the 15 minutes home, sat at my own kitchen table, and started to think the way I think on a failing structure. Not who do I yell at, what's actually holding this up, and what am I allowed to touch? Here's what I was allowed to touch, and what I wasn't. Because this is the part where most people would have made a mistake I didn't. I could not stop the sale by force of will. I wasn't the owner. The land sat in my grandfather's trust, and only he could sell it or refuse to. If he signed, confused, pressured, or simply trusting his son, the deal was legal, and I'd have no standing to undo it. I couldn't freeze a private negotiation. I couldn't outvote my father in his own family. Going to Grandpa with the folder risked his health and might still fail if Bryce got to him first with a softer story. Every direct road was blocked by something outside my control: ownership, his heart, the calendar. So I stopped looking for a way to fight the sale and started looking for a way to make the land not worth buying. That's a different problem, and it happens to be the exact problem I'm trained to solve. A developer doesn't want 6 acres. A developer wants 6 acres he can scrape flat and build on. Take away the second thing and the first thing stops being a deal. I couldn't change who owned the land, but I might be able to change what the law would let anyone do with it. And as it turned out, I didn't have to start from zero. Because a year and a half earlier, for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this, I'd already begun the slow, boring paperwork that could save the place. I just had to finish it before 60 days ran out. I couldn't stop a sale I didn't own, but I could make that ground impossible to gut. 18 months before any of this, on my own time, I'd started an application to get the Tatum Workshop buildings listed as a local heritage site. There was no scheme in it. I'd been doing a survey of pre-1980 structures for the town's historic inventory, and I'd stood in that shop where I learned to cut a tenon and thought, simply, I don't want this to vanish someday. So I'd opened a file. Heritage designation in our county does 2 things people don't expect. It restricts demolition and exterior alteration. And when it's paired with a state workforce heritage grant, the kind that funds trade programs in historic buildings, it carries a use covenant. Accept the grant money, and the property has to keep operating as a vocational training site for 20 years, or the owner repays every dollar with penalties. I'd applied for that grant a year ago, again just to keep the lights on, and it had been provisionally approved, sitting in my work queue waiting on the final designation paperwork I kept meaning to finish. After I saw that folder, I finished it. I drove to the county office the next morning, walked the last forms through myself, paid the recording fee, and got the designation entered into the public record with the covenant attached. Properly, openly, every signature legitimate, nothing hidden. It went on the books the day before the party. I didn't do it to win anything. I want to be honest about that, because the part that still gets me is that I almost didn't bother. I did it because I couldn't stand the thought of that bell going quiet. I had no idea standing at that county counter that I'd just made my brother's deal worthless. I only found that out later. So did he. Now back to the party. But you needed all that to feel what was actually happening under the place cards. The day before, Bryce had moved his timeline up. I knew because my mother let it slip in the group chat, pleased with herself. Bring the good pens Saturday. Your father has some family business to take care of with Grandpa. Good pens. For a birthday. I learned later from Marg that Bryce had told the board the same week that the program was winding down, and they should prepare for transition, softening the ground so 2 board members would nod along instead of object. And my father had been working Grandpa for a month, the way he works everyone, with the patient erosion of a dripping tap. You shouldn't have to manage all this at your age, Dad. Let us take the weight off you. Sign here so the boys can handle the headaches. It sounds like love if you don't know the man. It's how he's always taken things. Never a grab, always a favor. They were going to do it at the dinner because a dinner is the perfect cover. Lots of warm witnesses. An old man who won't make a scene in front of his grandchildren. Some paper naming Bryce a co-trustee slid across the table between the toast and the cake, framed as a kindness. Whatever it took to let the boys move the land without Grandpa having to lift a pen again. By the time anyone read the fine print, the South parcel would be Cooper Ridge Holdings' problem and the bell would be in a scrap pile. They had it all arranged. The good pens were coming. The board was prepped. The only thing they'd failed to account for sat at the corner of the table between a toddler and the wall, buttering a roll, with a county recording receipt dated yesterday in her bag. The night before the party, I sat at my kitchen table and built what I'll call my record, because it wasn't a trap, and I won't pretend it was. A trap is something you hide. Everything I gathered, anyone could have pulled. I printed the recorded heritage designation with its file stamp. I printed the grant award letter with its 20-year use covenant, the clause highlighted. I printed the county deed showing the land sat in Grandpa's trust, his name as sole trustee. And I printed the photos of the letter of intent, Bryce's signature, the operations to cease line, the sticky note. I put them in order, the way you'd order an inspection report. Here's the structure, here's the load, here's where it fails. My father's whole life has been built on appearances, on what a thing looks like to a room. My brother's plan ran on a lie nobody bothered to check. So I didn't bring more appearances and I didn't bring a louder lie. I brought paper that was simply, boringly true, the kind you can hand to a stranger and let them read for themselves. That's the difference between how they fight and how I do. They shame you in front of people. I let people read. They manipulate a confused old man in private. I put the facts on a public record any clerk could confirm. I wasn't building a weapon to hurt my family. I was building a record so that when the moment came, the truth wouldn't need me to raise my voice for it. I slid the pages into a plain envelope and set it by my keys. Then I went to bed, and for the first time in a month, I slept the whole night. The measuring was done. Quick thing before the dinner everyone's been waiting for. People kept telling me to stay quiet and keep the peace. Maybe you've heard that line too. Here's what I learned. Keeping the peace and protecting what's right are not the same thing, and a family that only stays calm because one person keeps swallowing the truth isn't peaceful. It's just quiet. If that lands for you, leave a comment. I read them. Now, the party. I got to my parents' house early, and walking up the drive, I passed the open garage and saw my father alone in there. He didn't see me. He was standing in front of an old photograph hung on the pegboard. Him at maybe 19, lanky, standing next to Grandpa outside the brand new shop, both of them squinting in the sun. Damon was just looking at it, and he said, low, to nobody. 50 years standing next to him. Never once was him. For a second, I saw the whole sad architecture of my father. A man who'd inherited a great name and never built a single thing to deserve it. Terrified that when the old man died, there'd be nothing left of Damon Tatum but the word on the sign. I almost felt for him. I want you to know I'm not made of stone. I stood there and felt the pull of it. Then he caught my reflection in the window glass and turned, and whatever softness had been on his face curdled instantly into contempt. Don't you dare pity me, he said. Go help your mother. And just like that, the man who'd been human for 3 seconds was gone, and the one who'd call me a clipboard in 2 hours took his place. Grandpa asked me to come out back before dinner, away from the noise, and that's where the night quietly turned, an hour before anyone knew it had. He was sitting on the porch step with a blanket over his knees, looking less frail out there than he had in the office. He patted the step. I sat. And then he reached into his shirt pocket and took out the folding ruler. The boxwood one. F. Tatum carved by the hinge. And he set it in my hand and closed my fingers over it. My father gave me this the day I opened the shop, he said. I've been carrying it ever since. It belongs in the pocket of somebody who uses it. I started to say something and he shook his head. The tremor was gone from his hands. His eyes were clear as a level bubble. Faith, he said quietly. I'm old. I'm not gone. I see a good deal more than they think I do. My heart climbed into my throat. I asked him what he meant. He just looked out at the yard where my father was laughing too loud with the board members and said, "A man shows you who he is when he thinks the old fool's asleep." He didn't say one word about a folder, a developer, a covenant. He didn't have to. I understood then that the trembling hands and the "let the boys carry it" and the closed face in the office had been a performance, that my grandfather had been playing dead so the carrion birds would land where he could see them. I slipped the ruler into my pocket. It felt like being handed something heavier than wood. Inside, my mother called us to the table. He pushed himself up with my arm and winked. "Let's go to my party," he said. The table that night had exactly the audience my brother wanted, and exactly the audience I needed. Same dinner I described at the start. This is the night it all happened on. But now let me show you what I was watching while my father warmed up. Earl was there, and Marg, and the 2 board members, Don and Pat, plus a scatter of cousins and aunts. 11, 12 people. Enough that nobody could later claim they'd heard it wrong. Bryce came in carrying a leather portfolio I'd never seen him own, and he set it on the sideboard with the care of a man handling his own future. When he opened it to pull out his phone, I saw the corner of a cream-colored folder inside, and clipped to the portfolio's pen loop were 2 heavy black pens, the good pens. He'd brought the closing documents to a birthday dinner. He'd brought pens to get an old man's signature on the dissolution of his life's work, between the toast and the cake, exactly as I'd guessed. He caught me looking and gave me a wink, mistaking my attention for envy. My mother had staged the optics beautifully. Candles, the good china, a banner that said 81 in gold. A room designed to make a hard thing feel soft, a betrayal feel like a kindness. Grandpa took his seat at the head, frail again, now that there was an audience, hands back to trembling on cue, and I had to look at my plate so I wouldn't give him away. The good pens gleamed on the sideboard. The folder waited. And my father, 3 bourbons in and certain of his evening, stood up to make sure everyone understood, one more time, exactly who did and did not belong to this family. "Before we cut the cake," my father said, "I want to make something clear, with the board here to witness it." He looked down the table at Grandpa, then at me, and I watched him decide to do it again, to use me as the warm-up act for the main event. "There's been some confusion about the future of this name, so let's settle it." He smiled at me, the smile that isn't one. "My daughter here measures other people's work for the county. That's a fine little job. But she's never built a thing in her life. She doesn't get a say in this family's legacy because, frankly," and here he spread his hands to the room like a man delivering good news, "she doesn't deserve to carry our name." And Bryce clapped. Again. Slower this time, savoring it, and 2 cousins joined in because the favorite son had set the tempo. My mother dabbed her eye like she was the one being brave. While the clapping was still going, Bryce reached to the sideboard, lifted the cream folder from his portfolio, and slid it down the table to rest in front of Grandpa, with one of the good pens laid across it. "Speaking of the future," he said warmly, "Grandpa, while we're all together, there's just a couple things here that'd take the weight off you, whenever you're ready." It was perfect, you have to admit. The shaming and the signing in the same minute. The room full of witnesses too polite to interrupt. The old man cornered by his own birthday. They thought the applause was the sound of winning. I sat very still and felt the ruler in my pocket, and I let them have their last good moment. Then I set my napkin beside my plate and quietly said, "Before anyone signs anything, I think Grandpa wants to say something first." My voice didn't rise. That's the part I'm proudest of looking back. I didn't take my father's bait, didn't match his volume, didn't give the room the meltdown it was braced for. I just laid the ruler on the white tablecloth in front of me, boxwood against linen, where Grandpa could see it, and I folded my hands. Every head turned. Bryce's smile flickered. Confused, not yet worried. The way you're confused when a tool you've used 1,000 times doesn't do the thing it always does. My father frowned at me. irritated that the clipboard had a voice tonight. Faith, sit down, this doesn't. But the room had already swung toward the head of the table, because that's where the energy in any family actually lives, and they could all feel it move. Grandpa set down his water glass. He looked at the cream folder in front of him, and the good pen lying across it, and then he looked, slowly, around his whole family, at Damon, at Bryce, at the board members, at the cousins with their hands still warm from clapping. He took his time. An old man is allowed to take his time at his own birthday. And then my grandfather, the one who'd been trembling and vague and letting the boys carry it, the one everybody at that table had quietly written off the same way they'd written me off, put both hands flat on the table and pushed himself up to standing. The blanket slid off his knees. He stood straight, steadier than my father, 3 bourbons in, and the room went so quiet I could hear the candles. For a moment he didn't say anything. He just stood at the head of his own table, 81 years old, and let the whole room understand that the frail man had been a costume. My father's irritation curdled into something more careful. "Dad," he started. "Sit down, you don't need to." Grandpa raised one hand, not even high, and Damon stopped. "That's a kind of authority you can't buy or inherit. You build it over 50 years, 2 rings of a bell at a time." He looked at me, and the corner of his mouth moved, that decision I'd seen at the first dinner finally arriving in full. Then he turned to my father, and he spoke, and his voice did not shake at all. "Damon," he said, "you told your daughter she doesn't deserve to carry our name." He let it hang there. "You said it twice now, in my house, at my table." He picked up the folding ruler from in front of me, the one with F. Tatum carved by the hinge, and he held it up so the room could see it. "Fine. A beat. Then she'll carry mine. And everything that comes with it." For 1 full second nobody moved. Then I watched my brother's smile come off his face like paint under a heat gun. Not slowly. All at once. Because Bryce, unlike my father, was quick enough to do the math in real time. Grandpa's name, Grandpa's trust, Grandpa's land, everything that comes with it. And he understood before anyone else at that table that something he'd thought was already his had just walked out the door. "No," Bryce said, half rising, the warmth gone out of him entirely. "No. Grandpa, you can't do this to me." "Can I?" Grandpa said, and there was no cruelty in it, just 50 years of patience reaching its end. He sat back down, slowly, deliberately, a man who'd decided the standing part was over and the truth-telling part could be done from a chair. "Sit down, Bryce. You too, Damon. You're going to want to hear this with your weight under you." They sat. The whole table sat, the way a class sits when the bell rings. "I'm old," Grandpa said. "I've let the 2 of you believe I'm something more than old, because I wanted to see what you'd do with the room when you thought the old man couldn't read it. A surveyor walked my land last month. I watched him from the office window. I get the mail, Damon. I see the filings. I knew about Cooper Ridge Holdings before either of you said the words at my table." Bryce had gone the color of putty. "Grandpa, that's not—" "Don't." Grandpa didn't raise his voice. He lowered it, which was worse. "Don't lie to me at my own birthday. You've done enough of that this year." He reached out and put 2 fingers on the cream folder Bryce had slid him, the one with the good pen lying across it, and he turned it around so the table could see the cover. "You want me to sign this? Let's all look at what you brought to my party." He opened it, slid out the letter of intent, and read aloud, unhurried, the one line that mattered. "Property to be delivered vacant. Existing training operations to cease prior to closing." He set it down. "Cease," he repeated, to the board members, to the cousins, to my white-faced mother. "Not relocate, not improve. Cease." My grandson signed an agreement to sell the ground out from under 41 kids and end the program his great-grandfather started. And he came here tonight to slide it under my hand, between the toast and the cake, while his father warmed you all up by telling my granddaughter she's not really family. Now. He folded his hands. "I've known about this for 2 months. And 2 weeks ago, I put my whole estate, this trust, and that shop, into Faith's hands. It's already done. It's already signed. By me. Damon found his voice first, and it came out ugly. You senile old. He caught himself in front of the board, swallowed it, tried again, reaching for reasonable. Dad, she manipulated you. She's been planning this. She got in your ear. She didn't say a word to me, Grandpa said. That's how I knew to trust her. Then he looked at me, and he did the thing he'd never once done in front of the family. He asked my opinion. Faith, they'll want to take this to a lawyer Monday and try to sell anyway. Tell them what they'll find. So I told them. Calmly, the way I'd read a load report to a contractor who didn't want to hear his beam wouldn't hold. You can take it to whoever you want, I said. It won't matter. 18 months ago, I started the paperwork to have the workshop buildings entered as a local heritage site. I finished it Thursday. It's recorded with the county. Anyone here can pull it Monday morning. Bryce was shaking his head, not following. Heritage designation restricts demolition, I said, and it's tied to a state workforce grant the shop was awarded last year. That grant carries a use covenant. The property has to operate as a vocational training site for 20 years, or the owner repays every dollar with penalties attached to the land itself. I let that settle. Halverson wants 6 acres he can scrape flat and build on. He can still buy the dirt. He just can't tear the buildings down, can't shut the program, and can't shake that covenant. It runs with the land, so any buyer inherits all 20 years of it. There's nothing here worth what he offered. The deal was dead before Bryce brought it to dinner. He just didn't check the record, because checking other people's work was always my job, not his. Pat, the board member, actually breathed out a small laugh. Relief, not humor. My father stared at me like he'd never seen me before, which I suppose he hadn't. And my mother, who had spent the entire night letting it happen, said the line I'll keep forever. Faith, honey, you should have told us. Should have told them. As if the folder on the sideboard had been an invitation to a conversation. I looked at her, and I didn't raise my voice either. You told everyone I just measure other people's work, I said. Turns out measuring other people's work is exactly what saved yours. That's when the room my father had built came down on him, and not one part of it was my doing. They did it to themselves, out loud, in front of every witness they'd invited to admire them. Damon stood so fast his chair went over backward. This is my family, he shouted, and there it was, the volume he'd always counted on to win. I gave you everything, both of you, and this is how. He swung toward Grandpa. You're going to humiliate me in front of the board over a pack of welding students? I am your son. Spit on the candles. The aunts flinched. Bryce was a different kind of unraveling, quieter, panicked, doing arithmetic. Grandpa, I already gave Halverson a good faith deposit, he said, fast, pleading. There's a break fee if the deal falls through, $40,000. I put it on. It's my money, I can't just… He stopped, realizing he'd confessed the whole thing to 12 people. My mother started to cry, the practiced kind, reaching for Grandpa's sleeve. Dad, you're confused. You're not well. This child has turned you against your own son. 3 of them, all going off at once, each in their own register. Rage, panic, performance. And the strange thing, the thing I want you to hear, is that I felt no urge at all to join them. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I didn't even stand up. I sat at the corner of the table where they'd put me, between the toddler and the wall, with my grandfather's ruler in my pocket, and I watched the people who'd spent my whole life telling me to calm down lose every shred of theirs. My father pointed a shaking finger across the wreckage at me, looking for the reaction he'd been trying to wring out of me for 33 years. I gave him the same thing I'd given him at the start of the night. I picked up my water. I'm not raising my voice, I said. I don't need to. The paper already did. The board settled it without a vote. Dawn pushed back from the table and said, plainly to the whole room, Walt, the program's not winding down, not while I'm on this board. Pat nodded and added that she'd be calling Marg Monday to fix whatever had been happening to the enrollment paperwork. Earl, who'd said nothing the entire night, finally spoke, looking right at Bryce. 41 kids last year, he said. You were going to sell their floor out from under them for a garage upgrade. He didn't say it loud. He didn't have to. The cousins who'd clapped were staring at their plates now, doing the quiet recalculation people do when they realize they applauded for the wrong side. And my father, for just a moment, in the wreck of his own party, looked across at me with something that wasn't rage. It was the garage face again. The man at 19 squinting next to his father, afraid of being nothing. For one breath I thought he might say the true thing. Then his jaw set, and he chose the only move he's ever known. You did this, he said to me, low and hateful. You split this family. Not I'm sorry. Not you were right. Just blame. Reaching for the door on his way down. Grandpa heard it. He picked up his fork, finally, and cut into the cake nobody had served. No, he said mildly. She's the only one who held it together. Nobody clapped this time. The Halverson deal died the following week, exactly the way I'd told them it would. Greg Saylor walked the moment his lawyer pulled the heritage record, and Bryce was left holding the $40,000 break fee he'd guaranteed with money he didn't have, a number he now gets to explain to his wife and his bank, not to me. My father stepped back from the shop entirely. There wasn't a role left for a man whose only job had been carrying a name that no longer answered to him. My mother sends the occasional group text about how we're all still family, which is true in the way a foundation crack is still part of the house. As for the workshop, it's still there. The designation held. The grant cleared. Marg got the enrollment fixed by the end of the month, and the spring intake came in at 36, the biggest class in 4 years. Grandpa had already signed me in as successor trustee 2 weeks before the party. The next Tuesday we sat down with his lawyer to record the amendment, hand over the files, and walk me through the duties. No theater, just a handshake. And I run Tatum Tradeworks now. I still have my day job measuring bridges. I just spend my Saturdays at the shop. And every morning at 8 o'clock I do the thing I watched my grandfather do my whole childhood. I take the worn leather strap by the door and I ring the brass bell twice, and 36 kids who'll swear they don't care file in and care anyway. The folding ruler lives in my shirt pocket now. F. Tatum by the hinge, soft at the joints from 60 years of better thumbs than mine. People ask why I didn't just confront my brother the day I found that folder, march in and have it out. I tell them the truth. You don't win against people like that by being louder. You win by being right where they can't argue with it. On the record, in the daylight, with the receipts already filed. I want to be clear that I didn't slam every door, because revenge that eats you isn't revenge. It's just a slower version of losing. I told my father there's a place for him at the shop if he ever wants one. Teaching, repairing, doing actual work with his actual hands. The thing he never let himself try because the name made it feel beneath him. Not as the Tatum. As a man who shows up. He hasn't taken me up on it. He may never. That's his to carry, not mine. Bryce asked, through my mother, whether I'd cover the break fee, to keep peace in the family. I said no, kindly and once. I'm done paying other people's bills to buy a quiet that only ever cost me. The door to the shop is open to anyone willing to earn what's on the other side of it. The free pass, the one my family handed out for 33 years to everyone but me, that one's closed for good. You can have my help. You cannot have my silence. Those were always two different things. I just used to give them both away. If there's one thing that table taught me, it's this. A name isn't something somebody hands you across the dinner table. It's something you earn by what you're willing to protect when the whole room is clapping for the other side. That's my story. One smirk, one round of applause, and one old man who saw everything. If this reminded you that the quiet ones are usually holding the whole thing up, go check on yours and let them know you see it. And if someone needs to hear this, share it. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.